Jeez, Umbra. I knew you were coming over today for the look back, but I mean, you can knock, you know? You don't have to break the door every time you come in. Anyways, we're gonna get on it soon. I'm trying to figure out which figure would go best as my centerpiece for this table here. I got all the Koronians, which look really nice, and I got my Harukas here. But I can't quite think of what would be a good centerpiece here. Oh, I know, of course! The king! What better centerpiece but the king, of course. Ah, yes. Now my collection is complete. Alright, Umbra, you waited long enough for this. So let's roll. A look back. Kamurocho, 2018. It all started on the night of December 3rd. However, the timeline connects even further back to 3 years ago, when I walked a different path. I'd like to go over the case one last time. It's been quite an adventure. We haven't had a proper breather to just relax. This is Umbra, performing my own private investigation into the Yagami Detective Agency. This time, here are my findings. Okay, Umbra, you can stop role-playing now. Where exactly are we headed? You know what? Let's go head to Theater Square. Maybe we'll find what we're looking for there. So I've decided to sequence this look back into 3 different parts: story, character, and functions. That way I should be able to cover just about everything that I want in this case analysis. God, did you just say case analysis? We're out of school, alright? We're not doing that shit anymore. Why don't we cut through? Let's cut through. Sure. We don't want to run into any baddies after all. No shabby wires either. Anyways, despite taking place in the same universe as the Yakuza series, I was intrigued to see how Judgment was going to play out. The most interesting concept was that before starting this title, I had no idea what to expect. This game just featured Yagami beside a white background, and it's not really telling us to what the theme of the game is going to be. It doesn't leave much for interpretation. So when the game wasn't surrounding the Yakuza, but rather the law, I was very intrigued to see how the story and perspective shift was going to be handled. But let's start with the story now. All the way back to 2015. Our protagonist, Yagami, is a very credited lawyer who was even able to successfully refute a prosecution team. This is a major stride because they had an absolute chance at convicting defendants, and oh shit, wait, no, you don't see me. You definitely don't. Oh, really, guys? Really, guys? I'm filming a fucking video here. Stupid ass bitch. Ass motherfucker. I'm filming a video. Asshole. Suck on this. Okay.
Really, guys?
Alright. Thanks for the help, Ryan. Alright, you need to disappear now. I gotta get back to filming. So, as I was saying... Alright, let's take this from the top, all the way back to 2015. The defendant, Okubo, was under irrefutable evidence that he was responsible for 2 different murders. One for a dementia patient, Waku, and the other for his girlfriend and co-worker, Emi. I really enjoyed how Yagami solving the first case was seen as such an outstanding feat where everybody was universally accepting and acknowledging of him, and then everyone just immediately lost interest and lost hope after the second murder case with Emi. I do like this setup because it makes a lot of great backstory for Yagami, as it makes him seem like he really made the wrong decision, even though he pursued the truth. And it also showcases how strong his ideals and principles of justice are, that he would work towards the truth despite the prosecution's ruling. Yagami, with as little exposition of his past that we do see, comes across as a very carefree individual, but very burdened with the past. He starts his own private PI firm, and I do like that he turns to another field where he can still use his expertise. After all, Yagami was raised on the streets and has more competencies than a certain legendary Yakuza, who will not be named. Now, since we know that he is a PI and he's no longer a lawyer, our scope and spread of what we can do is much more liberative. No doubt this is good for him, since he can operate outside the law and perform his own investigations without interference. The year is now 2018, and Yagami has been taking on odd jobs to get by, which is kind of a stretch because it's canon that he can barely afford his rent. The whole ordeal in 2015 though is reignited when an old lawyer colleague Shintani requests our assistance for a job. Apparently there's been a string of strange circumstantial murders on a Yakuza family. This all sounds fishy to me from a glance. First off, it's a Kansai-based family, which means they aren't from Kamurocho or the Tojo, and next is that they aren't part of the Omi Alliance, which I suppose, to give context to the Yakuza series, is essentially the Osaka counterpart of the Tojo clan. I guess it's also important that each of these murders have their eyes missing, but that's later on. Shintani gets us up to speed and wishes to hire our talents. Our task? To investigate the murders of Kume. No, not the one from Like a Dragon 7, the third eyeless victim of the Kyode family, and to prove the innocence of our defendant. Turns out the prime suspect is a Yakuza captain Hamada. Quite like the Okubo case in 2015, there's a ton of incriminating footage against him, and yet we're set to defend him. In court? Us. Live. Well, actually Shintani, while Yagami here does the legwork. It doesn't help that the pretense of the situation though is very telling after our investigation. This case got me really engaged, and there are a ton of mini activities introduced with the investigation process that are all pretty enjoyable, with Yagami providing his expert insight, pushing the investigation forward, and giving him personality. The only negative I would say would be the tailing sequences, as they can be artificially long for no reason. Piecing together the time frame though and forming Hamada's alibi was all very thrilling, and it reminded me of Danganronpa. Sometimes to hear the truth, you need to corner them psychologically. As we build our case, I realize that Yagami is a well-connected individual. He has connections in the Yakuza, organized crime, the justice system, and even convenience store clerks. I like the difference in perspective where we have a protagonist that's inquisitive and critical thinking. By now I've also realized that this game is way more story and detail orientated than combat focused. I found this to be a positive trait, which does make me personally dislike that the main story would occasionally take you away from the main plot for some unrelated side case or system introduction to kind of pace out the seriousness or the tone of the story. However, I'm no stranger to this presentation style since the Yakuza games have a similar sequence too. Naturally, there is action and combat in our investigation process. Since we're no longer a lawyer, we can't access information through formal channels anymore. We have to scrounge for our evidence. Of course, why not go looking for Yakuza evidence in a Yakuza hideout? I really enjoy the introduction of disguises and how you have the freedom to wear different ones for cases. It's a shame you can't wear them in premium adventure mode as costumes, and Yagami actually has speech 100 and is able to infiltrate and blend pretty well into spaces. Similar to Yagami's personality, I'm glad that they decided to ground our self-taught martial artist Kamurocho style man as a detective and not a superhuman fighter. No doubt, Yagami is tough, but he's not a raid a Yakuza HQ type of guy. Well, not yet. Naturally, there is action and combat in our investigation process. Since we're no longer a lawyer, we can't access information through formal channels anymore, and we have to scrounge for our evidence. Of course, why not go looking for Yakuza evidence in a Yakuza hideout? I really enjoyed the introduction of disguises and how you have the freedom to wear different ones for cases. It's a shame you can't wear them in premium adventure mode as costumes. Yagami actually has speech 100 and is able to infiltrate and blend pretty well into spaces. Similar to Yagami's personality, I'm glad that they decided to ground our self-taught martial artist Kamurocho style man as a detective and not a superhuman fighter. No doubt Yagami is tough, but he's not a raid a Yakuza HQ type of guy. Well, not yet. With Hamada's alibi secured, the Kyode conflict is de-escalated, and all the details surrounding the case are revealed. There's one disturbing conclusion for both Yagami and myself though, and that is Hamada is a definite accomplice to the true murder of Kume. However, this court was about if Hamada was the culprit and not an accomplice. As such, he walks free. This was such a great exposition to the beginning of the story and demonstrates that nobody cares about the truth or the underlying details of the case. as long as the finger can be pointed to pass judgment, no pun intended, then the case is closed. Yagami's monologue in the courtroom at the end of the first case is phenomenal. I like how his job as Shintani's detective is now concluded. He has no reason to pursue Kumei's true killer, but Yagami is essentially a mercenary. He can do as he wishes and is not bound by legal restrictions. It's almost as if Kumei's case reignited Yagami's ideals and principles to pursue the objective truth to this case, even if it meant risking his life. Yagami dubs our mysterious eye killer the Mole. However, we no longer have any mole clues to go on after the trial. What? Not funny? So why not use our connections? Now, if I had $1 for every time there's an underground casino in Kamurocho, I would have 2, which is strange because I still don't have my $2. Bro, please stop, okay? Stop, man. Got it. Moving on. So we're meeting with an organized crime cop named Ayabe. We've made a deal that we're gonna exchange big money for big info. Ayabe is a dirty cop, but he trusts Yagami with his confidentiality given we screwed over Kuroiwa, his boss. Pretty damn based reason, honestly, but valuable nonetheless. With this new info in tow, we learn not too fucking much as I hoped we would. New insight into the past 2 victims of the Kyode only shows that the second victim visited a brothel before meeting with destined death. Too bad it's right into a trap, sprung by the man that we saved. I found this encounter to be incredibly brutal. Yagami takes an absolute fucking beating from the Matsugane family, and I love the fake out that Hamada pulls like he's about to pierce Yagami's eyes. The coolest detail to this scene to me was that Hamada wasn't going to kill Yagami. To delve a bit further than I've discussed already, they wouldn't have used 89 on him because he's a civilian, not a criminal. He could disappear easily, but that's not true because everyone knows that he's investigating the mole case, so it would leave a larger trace if Yagami were to perish there. Naturally, I think in the heat of the moment, Yagami does end up provoking Hamada enough that he actually tries to have him killed via gun, but Masked Man arrives and saves us. This entire sequence was really gripping, and Yagami's story was about to end there. Just shows how brutal and mysterious the opposition is against him, but it also shows just how strong his strength and genuineness is to uncovering the truth. The next section mainly focuses on the history of 2 of our 4 main characters, Kaito and Higashi. We're not talking characters yet, so I'll be going off plot points as of now. I did enjoy how they tied Hamada and Kaito's past expulsion and how the events that occur come full circle. I'd like to elaborate more on this. Once again, I'll be talking a bit ahead of what's been discussed. I perceive Hamada to be a foil to Kaito. Near the end of the game, we learn that Hamada really did admire Patriarch Matsugane and genuinely wanted the family to be strong, which is why he committed all those atrocities. Hamada gained power and respect, but at the cost of his humanity, while Kaito lost everything, but was somewhat able to live with himself and was carefree like Yagami. It's an amazing contrast that I find for these 2 Matsugane Yakuza that develop really well near the end as you learn more about Hamada's intent and involvement. Alright, back to the present now. The entire chapter really shows how our main cast always seems to be at the wrong place and at the wrong time, but literally every time. After this chapter, as the player, it made me really question how Hamada was able to be so evil, but also fearless in the face of life in prison during the Kumei trial. It's quite the mystery that still lingers with me, and I wonder where the story would have gone if Yagami decided to let Hamada go to jail. Though, now that I think of it, Kuroiwa would have probably released him. Or killed him. Who knows? Either way, the next chapter starts off with a bang, and a Matsugane Yakuza gets offed by what everyone thinks is a Kyode assassin. I don't think the specifications of this incident ever get clarified in the story, so it's really up for interpretation. It could really be a Kyode assassin, Ichinose's hitman, or a Matsugane inside job to give Hamada a reason to hide. Whatever else, Ayabe drops more lore bombs, because he's really good at that, and my suspicions were sort of spot on that the Kyode were being backed by an organization. To To be honest, I didn't really care too much about the faceless factions in the game. This includes the KJ group, the Health Ministry, and the Kyode main head. While they have their own particular motives, I find them uninteresting due to having more or less the same goal, to acquire territory or big money. Naturally, with these new revelations on the Kyode, perhaps Murase may assist our investigation. Yeah, right, Yagami. And we almost die once again to Gun. However, just like last time, the masked man saves us once again, and the Kyode clearly mean business this time as the clan captain Shioya is the one that we face. At this point, it makes sense that they're this high alert. Nonetheless, we wipe the floor with them and become formally acquainted with our last main cast member, Sugiura. Time to head home and relax for now. Just kidding. Looks like we got our first civilian casualty in all this, Shintani. The real question I started asking was that the deed had to have been done by someone that I am trusting of. The culprit must have known where I live or work, is able to have a copy of my key to get into the agency, and was able to hide the body without any blood staining other parts of the room. But then I found out that none of what I just said was important, and I guess Shintani's body just manifested into my closet. I suppose Shintani's death was an accident due to his insider information from Hamada. Given the cause of death were bullet wounds, it's telling that he was disposed of to prevent further info from leaking, then had his eyes removed to keep the theme of the murders aligned. But the fact that Shintani's body was deposited in my office is a grim warning that there is someone who is already monitoring me. Rest in peace, Shintani. You will not be missed. You were a huge dick to Yagami, and you got what you deserved. Anyways, his death does not go without notice, though. We get a huge hint from his body, with little context as of now, that a medical organization, the ADDC, no, I am not going to pronounce its full organization title ever in this video. The ADDC was Shintani's last cell phone call before death. Luckily, there's a slight link. The Okubo cases that went down in 2015 were both involved in the ADDC and its members. The plot starts to expand here. I start to think that there's a whole lot more of covert players that are plotting behind the scenes than just the mole. When first arriving at the ADDC, I noticed that there's a lot of detail put into the map, like a lot. The reception, the ward areas, they're all fully generated. I just wanted to point out that effort was put into that, despite being a limited time story zone. Soon after arriving, we run into 3 big grunts. Well, not grunts, but the big 3. Not like I knew their importance at the time. Kido, Shono, and Ichinose. There's a very insightful flashback sequence that gives us a very well executed exposition on how the Okubo investigation and case went down. Going through this, realizing that Shintani is dead and that Okubo killed Emi is even more disturbing, but it gives full clarity on Yagami's past and actually reveals the culprit or the true mastermind if you're paying attention. Of course, it wouldn't be enough to accuse him though. Who I'm talking about is Shono. Since Yagami directly points out his lie during the Waku case that he saw him in his bed, it's brilliant foreshadowing that makes the ADDC even more eerie than it appears superficially. Too bad we're not gonna get any cooperation out of Director Kido, and oh, apparently we're also suspected of being Shintani's murderer. I must be a very wise murderer if I had decided to hide the body in my own room. Brilliant, Yagami. Brilliant. After receiving multiple hints from multiple people that were not welcome here at the ADDC, we somehow still managed to meet with Shono, the lead researcher of 89, the dementia-curing drug. Naturally, we get busted almost immediately, but the atmosphere and reception is extremely telling that there's a huge secret in this facility. Although we're out of leads, we have a new ally and new connections. Sugiura drops lore with more base boost than Ayabe's intel. Umbra, your fucking jokes are something else. Save them for the next game, alright? Yeah, you got it. Either way, it gives us info on the Ministry of Health, the KJ group, and how they ended up getting the short stick due to the ADDC's 89 innovation. God, I'm not saying that 10 times fast. Piecing this all together, I think this wraps up every faction into an allegiance or motive, except for the Matsugane family. That was the one group that was weighing on my mind during this chapter, specifically Hamada's whereabouts and the role or allegiances that he or the family had. I guess Wikipedia or high school assignment Google searches actually work, because apparently that entire lore bomb came from Hattori, who is Yagami's journalist acquaintance. Honestly, I'm surprised that Hattori didn't end up deceased in this case before Shintani if the article was published for some time. My thoughts were, well, he could be next. So we're headed to meet up with him quickly at the Genda office. Surprise Mafuyu though, and we get more useless warnings from the prosecution that they suspect me of being Shintani's murderer. Ah, the prosecution, always 10 steps behind. Either way, she says her bit and leaves. But Spider-Man's Sugiura senses are tingling, and the Kyode are stalking Mafuyu. Yagami naturally has none of this and takes the fight all the way to them, leading to a Yakuza cabaret. The surprise reveal shows Hattori and the KJ lead, Shigeru. This is quite interesting. From the looks of it, Hattori may have gotten himself in a bind with the article, and is now either being held hostage by the KJ, or is operating for them to make amendments. Either way, the KJ wheelchair man confirms what we learn about Hattori's article, that both his group and the ministry took a huge L when 89 was announced. However, a new piece of light comes to play, and that is an individual named Hashiki. During my first playthrough, this is when I started to get information overload. Ever since the 89 introduction, I found the plot to progress very quickly. Either way, Hashiki's attempt at whistleblowing essentially got him killed, which, strange enough though, no missing eyes. KJ Wheelchair believes that the 89 is a fake-out idea, but what I was more interested in is how, or if this is true, why was the idea so worth protecting? Is the ADDC high on copium? Why did you write this in the script, Umbra? We investigate Hashiki and Ayabe drops another lore bomb, making this a trilogy now in the form of a blonde Mafuyu. Umbra, stop tampering with my script! Turns out he was last publicly seen at a cabaret club. It's Saudi time. This part is pretty funny, but also interesting that she agrees to it. Saudi doesn't have a stake in our investigation, but I think after Shintani's passing she became a lot more bolder and felt left behind with how involved everyone else was, such as Genda and Hoshino. Saudi's endeavor does shine light to Hashiki's cause of death. Looking back on this, Shono was with him at the club. No doubt Hashiki spilling his secrets, wasted at the cabaret club, made Shono aware of the threat that he could possess and thus had the mole eliminate him. Kuroiwa then pays us a visit, highly insinuating that we should visit the prosecution. For some reason we agree, but what comes next is my favorite. So we head to sleep and are awoken by Ayabe in our office, sitting on my chair. During my replay, this is also intentionally misleading but well executed, because he did this before during our 100k transaction. It's a very small detail, but it makes Ayabe seem like he's definitely the mole, since he's able to infiltrate into Yagami's agency without signs of a break-in. On top of that, he warns us that our prosecution meeting might be bad news. And sure enough, he's right. Ayabe's the culprit for Shintani's death. Case closed, video's over. Just kidding. Delving more into this though, it's pretty unbelievable. Ayabe's been providing us with info surrounding the Matsugane, Kyode, KJ, and Hashiki. If he was the mole or even was the antagonist, it wouldn't make any sense for him to provide us with so much support, unless he's one of these villains that enjoy the thrill. However, at this time I realized that the true culprit did this not to spite Ayabe, but to halt Yagami. Ayabe was Yagami's most constant and reliable source of info that pushed the investigations forward, and now he's in hot water, unable to assist. I love how the importance of this game is centered around gathering info and evidence rather than being roadblocked due to a powerful enemy that cannot be overcome through strength alone. Essentially, being able to not pursue the truth is just as bad as death for Yagami in this case. Desperate for clues here and wondering where Hamada has holed up this entire time brings us back to the Matsugane. Just like everyone else, we're dissuaded to keep searching for the mole, but Yagami's principles cannot be shaken. Through some more investigation, Hamada's whereabouts are revealed, and turns out the man's been gambling while people are dying. Kinda fucking based. After a long-awaited beatdown, Hamada still doesn't spill the beans, but Yagami is able to make movie-like inferences based on Hamada's reactions that is enough for us to come out with a clue. We got some big new reveal, such as Shono is the mastermind behind 89, a good sum of the events up to this point, and a link to the Waku case that may be worth reinvestigating. Time to talk to Okubo, and I really love his portrayal. This man is such a good representation of a distraught, confused, frustrated, and resentful individual that still is somehow able to hold on to hope despite being a death row inmate. Back to the city and surprise, Cane Man. You know, every Yakuza game has some fucking wacko bullshit, but this man's weapon is something else. It's a cane, sword, dual-wield baton, spear gun, and can manifest a sword through some illusion magic. Anyways, now that the turntables and the Matsugane are hunting us, and the Kyode are our friends since we have a temporary alliance with Hattori and the KJ wheelchair, we decide to head straight to the source for our answer, Shono at the ADDC. Naturally, we can't just waltz in there, but it's Ichinose this time turning us away. Nonetheless, we're able to sneak in through illegal entry, but somehow plausible methods. I mean, seriously, I find it hilarious that an advanced medical facility like the ADDC that's inventing and housing dementia patients has no security cameras. Let that sink in for a second. Dementia patients. No security cameras. Regardless, Shono spills the beans that Hamada did it. Yagami uses these same movie-like inferences on Shono and comes to one truth. He's gonna find the culprit, and he's gonna fucking kill... No, and he's gonna make sure that Emi gets justice and Okubo is free. There's definitely one thing I took away from this, and it's that Shono has a greater than 1% to have killed Waku or Emi. The only question I had for myself was, is Shono actually some sort of crazy psycho, and he's just a very submissive researcher on the inside? Well, who can say? For me, the entertaining factor is always finding out the reason or the motive, not necessarily the culprit or the cause. Now this next chapter is hilarious. We spend literally half of it pissing off the Matsugane around town to draw Hamada out for more answers, and the other half raiding a building. Classic RGG moments. Either way, we finally secure Hamada, and this time, he's gonna talk. I found the interrogation as a great recap of the story, since Hamada, quite like Yagami, has been involved in the story since the night of December 3rd. This sets the stage nicely, as all the antagonists and its collaborators are revealed. Well, most of them at least, including their corresponding factions and motives. The story's packing some real heat now. So hot, in fact, that the burning goes up in flames. That's a typo, I meant building. But that's kind of funny. That's like an Umbra joke right there. Maybe I should keep that in. Yeah, I'll keep that in. Fuck you, Umbra. As tragic of an end as things result in, we finally encounter the mole, and Hamada, with nothing more to lose, reveals their identity. With Kuroiwa identified as the elusive mole, looking back, his appearances are definitely shady. During our first visit to the ADDC, he knows that we were in Kido's office. He constantly warns Yagami and is quite passive-aggressive to our investigations, and he appears right before the Cane Man attacks. I didn't really suspect Kuroiwa to be the mole, rather I perceived him more of a foil to Yagami, since he was a detective as well under the police. Either way, he's definitely skilled, and the next day, Shioya is found dead, which means he was killed after we all escaped the building. Time to get our hands dirty, and I like how we chose to target Kido of all the villains we've learned of. After all, quite like Hamada, Kido was just unlucky to be manipulated into a situation where he was involved before he even realized it. That aside, the Hangman makes a cameo, and I still have no idea if that thing is even human, and we find all the evidence we need to incriminate Shono and the ones backing him. Too bad there's another secret villain, because we need more villains. More, please, bring them all. Morita, who's the prosecution lead, He overrules the investigation, and unfortunately, that sets Yagami back to square one. All is lost, at least from how it appears to be in the moment, but we do now have the full picture of Sugiura. It didn't make sense to me the more I progressed the story as to why he was assisting Yagami so much despite being ex-KJ group, but his motives become all clear now. Known as Fumiya Terasawa, he was Emi's younger brother, and honestly, Sugiura became a fan favorite for myself. Me, I'm his fan, that's me. Anyways, the game brings back Horse Gambler Detective from the first chapter, and we get a quick lore drop on why Morita turned to the dark side. I feel like this small section of the game was pretty unnecessary, just because Morita ended up being a last-minute villain. They needed to shed some backstory on him. It's pretty understandable, but it does compromise him as an operator of justice or the law, or however you want to interpret it. I don't really have any sympathy for Morita as a villain. In plain terms, he's just not being objective or fair towards the involved parties. Before we head off, however, to the last fight, we get a nice little sequence with our other main cast. Some Higashi screen time, a glimpse at Hoshino's development as a lawyer, and a long-awaited visit to Okubo with the truth from 2015. A month passes, and apparently nothing noteworthy happens during that time period. It's time for Ayabe's trial, though. However, Yagami and the crew have got this down, with Izumida on our side, Kito's testimony secured, and Ichinose in the limelight. Honestly, the trial was pretty funny for me because Ichinose is just freaking the fuck out in center stage, while Izumida is letting Yagami cook the entire conspiracy to the ground. Naturally, the game can't end on a talk no jutsu trial though, and Ichinose orders Kuroiwa to execute Order 66 on the ADDC. It's a pretty brutal sequence that demonstrates Kuroiwa's absolute brutality and disregard for anything. A big battle ensues, and turns out his motives are similar to that of many of the other villains. This is one concept that I did dislike about the ending. Shono, Morita, and Kuroiwa basically had the exact same motives, where someone close to them was affected by dementia, whereas the faceless or faction head villains were all involved due to monetary or asset reasons such as Kazami and the KJ wheelchair. The ending is wrapped up pretty quickly, and all our main casts get their respective closure. That's it for the story. I find the ending to be a bit rushed, but that's usually the case for JRPGs where the plot needs to settle all conflicts alongside demonstrating a peaceful aftermath for complete closure. Now for characters. I wanted to discuss our main cast of 4, Yagami, Kaito, Sugiura, and Higashi. Naturally, there are other important supporting characters such as Hoshino, Saori, Mafuyu, and even Ayabe, but they have more spotlight moments than constant development over the course of the game. So let's start with our slim jeans kickflip Yagami. I like how basic and minimalistic his design is, yet also ridiculous because it's so anti-combat or exploration. I also like how his hairstyle becomes messy after his lawyer days are over. I may be looking too into this, but his hairstyle changes from being proper back in 2015 to unkempt in 2018 due to a detective's life being more freeing. At the end of the game, he even admits that not having to dress up is the main reason why he won't go back to being a lawyer. Design aside, I really enjoyed Yagami's personality. He has a very open-minded perspective on life due to being raised on the streets and having 2 father figure mentors, one in the law and one in crime. Because of this and his biological father's case, I believe Yagami became obsessed with uncovering the truth as a lawyer so that proper judgment, no pun intended this time, can be carried out. I liked how truth as a theme is also depicted quite well. For instance, not every side case has a happy ending. Sometimes the results are simply what was assumed after the evidence was acquired, or sometimes the results hurt our client or make them apprehensive. It's an unsettling reminder that the truth can hurt, and is sometimes what we don't want to hear, even though it's what we seek. I recall Genda's wisdom that he imparted to Yagami, that it was a lawyer's duty not to convict, but to prove that the prosecution doesn't have enough evidence to convict. I've never been involved in the law in any capacity, but for me this quote was a big takeaway. Guilty before being proven innocent is a bias that humans always seem to lean towards. Yagami perseveres through the Waku case, but gives up hope for Okubo during the Emi case. Yagami is set up quite nicely, where he goes from a recognized high to a low, where all his peers pity or are disgusted with him. It's a brilliant contrast where judgment was passed on Yagami without enough evidence, yet everyone abandoned him once they convicted him as a failure. In the end, Yagami himself loses hope and gives up on the truth, attempting to leave it all behind by abandoning his position. Next up is our ex-Matsugane, Kaito. For a Yakuza, Kaito is quite literally bigger than the average grunt. He's very tall and muscular, and for some reason uses Kiryu's moveset. I found that hilarious. That aside, his signature shining bright orange dress shirt and tight business pants make for a look only he can pull off. Seriously, what's with those tight pants, RGG? Is this fan service for the lady players? By the way, Kaito is a powerhouse of a fighter, probably being equal in strength to Yagami. I really enjoy his laid-back and carefree attitude, and quite like our detective, he's been through a lot, being framed by Hamada and getting off without consequence due to Matsugane's interference. Kaito puts up a positive front despite the shame of the incident still weighing on him, and I very much enjoy the interactions and EX actions with Kaito. It shows just how similar these two pariahs are, and how, despite being framed and ostracized, they can still keep going. I do wish that we had more scenes between Kaito and Higashi. Higashi was Kaito's subordinate during his Yakuza tenure, and I would have liked some more scenes of them interacting about everything in the past and developing their own motives for going against the 89 conspiracy. Sugiura is next, or Fumiya, or Terasawa. Whichever alias you prefer, this noble thief is my favorite character in the game. Sugiura, for about 50% of the story, is a mysterious man. He's been stalking Yagami for a long time as a deep grudge for his sister's case. I would have liked if they expanded on the burglary ring a bit more, but I suppose tying it with the main plot wouldn't have made too much sense. There are already too many damn factions. Anyways, he saves Yagami not once but twice from the fate of a bullet, and joins us under the guise of being ex-KJ. Believable enough, since we know from Crow that the burglary ring did begin with noble intentions under Jester's command. I never questioned his continued aid despite the mole case being so dangerous, and I did enjoy how, when we raided the Kyode cabaret, he wears his mask during this section as to hide his identity, because the KG are associated with the Kyode. Later on, when he reveals his true identity to our crew, I loved the execution of it all. Sugiura is the youngest of our four heroes, and has proved to be more immature during the story. He's self-aware of his emotions though, and wears his mask as he explains how he developed a deep hatred for society and the way the Emi case ended. To me, this felt like a certain Detective Prince all over again, and I was all for it. Sugiura's build-up and frustration was valid, but it's as he says, he was just a kid. What could he do? Which is why he stalked Yagami, not only to sate his frustration and anger, but to also see what he would do. Finally, since I'm giving Sugiura a lot of time than the other characters, I did enjoy how nice and genuine his characterization was. He informed Yagami about the Hattori article, kinda saved Mafuyu's life, took a bullet for Yagami during the Kuroiwa fight. Oh, and his design is so simple and slick that I think I'm gonna cosplay it. And we saved the best for last. Here comes Higashi. Not sure about the best part, but definitely unique from the rest of the crew. Higashi is first introduced beating the crap out of Kaito in my office. Not a good way of saying that he's going to be an important character. Also, since he's another Matsugane Yakuza, I originally wrote him off as another named lieutenant, like Ozaki or Kengo. I didn't expect him to be as important as he became. Higashi definitely had the least amount of direct spotlight of the crew, but most of his story is rather internal, with his allegiances between Kaito, his Aniki, and the Matsugane family. It's a very interesting characterization that doesn't get enough notice as he's a boss fight, as well as doesn't get any duo partner times with Yagami. Beside the small sequence near the end of the game, Higashi fundamentally was a rank and file ordinary Yakuza for most of the game's story events, and since he only appears during Matsugane related plot during the story, it's unfortunate why it's easy to see him as an unimpactful character until he starts joining Yagami's cause. However, Higashi is a very well-established character, and I do have high hopes to see his role in Lost Judgment. We're on to functions. Surprisingly, Kamurocho 2018 is quite small, compared to other Kamurocho variants. There's no underground mall, expansive rooftop, purgatory, sewers, with the mining tunnel, and no other cities. Not that I was expecting a fully explorable Kamado, but it's pretty cool to see the city 2 years after Yakuza 6 and how it's been developed. The two highlight minigame additions, Drone Racing and Paradise VR, really emphasize the new feel to Kamado. Since I'm already on minigames, there isn't really too much new variation in selection. You have your classic returning Western and Eastern gambling games, arcade games, darts, and batting. This game also really likes Mahjong. Like, really. There are a total of 3 parlors, with one of them having unique challenges, plus there's a secret hidden table too. Drone Racing was really cool, being an adaptation of the Pocket Circuit Racing from Zero. Controls are very smooth, very responsive, and there were unique soundtracks for each drone league. The only thing I wanted was more maps. I hope they expand on this minigame in Lost Judgment since I found it pretty addicting. There are 2 other outstanding minigames that I also enjoyed, Kamado of the Dead and Paradise VR. They both were 2 new games that I haven't encountered before. One of them is quite similar to the arcade game House of the Dead, and Paradise VR has a lot of effort put into it as it's a virtual reality form of Kamurocho in the form of a board game. There's unique activities within each space and it can be quite profitable to play. If only such an activity existed in real life. Anyways, next I want to address the combat functions. You've got 2 stances, and they both pack a punch. I enjoyed just how much detail was put into the different EX actions depending on the stance. The technique and animations would be different, and it makes for some really satisfying moments when you execute them. I do find fault, though, in how underutilized many of them are. You see, Judgment does not have any weapons. As such, pulling off the weapon-orientated actions are harder than usual. In addition, Crane is vastly under-acknowledged in skills. Just about every single skill upgrade in the game is Tiger-focused, which is fine, since it packs a lot of damage and will be your main stance when facing the many bosses in the game. It's a good balance for sure, and I like how they gave Yagami a lot of uniqueness to his fighting style. It's a stylish mix of Kung Fu that he learned as a kid and MMA from the streets. And finally, the last function to conclude this look back that I wanted to discuss was the friendships we made along the way. The neat thing about friendships is that they're tied to natural progression. Main story, side cases, eatery items, they're all pretty organic and easy to complete. It doesn't feel like a chore, and the city becomes more dynamic as you'll see friends walk around and assist you in combat. They'll wave at you, they'll give you items sometimes, and as your reputation increases, side cases become more complex since your credibility goes up, and hangout spots for different civilians will assist you in investigations, whether for main or side stories. It's great. Friendships are very unique and a symbiotic way of improving Yagami that aligns with his character and his personality too, and I enjoyed the overall execution of the Kamado Go. Thumbs up from me, RGG. And with that, that concludes my findings on the Yagami Detective Agency. This is Umbra, and from what I can infer, it's a very credible place of business that offers client confidentiality and guaranteed 100% truth results. Also, they have anime figures too. Yagami is a true otaku. Case closed.